There has been a massive leak from the world of Pokemon. This leak revealed many things, but most people focused on the new games and upcoming projects. Well, one other topic captured the public's attention, but we'll get to that later. I've decided to look into the several pieces of lore that Game Freak decided to leave on the cutting room floor. As we learned about the world of Pokemon, we also learned about what almost made it into the games. It's obvious why most of this stuff didn't make it in, but it's strange to see what could have been canon in a game rated E for everyone. Pokemon has its fair share of dark concepts, but that all pales in comparison to what didn't make it in. You thought it was creepy that Drifloons steal children or that Cubones wear the skulls of their dead mothers? Well, wait until you see what Game Freak had planned for more of the lore of Pokemon. The first story we're going to cover is about Sharpedo. Sharpedo is a shark Pokemon from Generation 3. A story focused around them goes exactly as you think it would, and no, it's not a Jaws situation. They decided to take this into a more realistic reality. Here's the story. In places where there are rules and order, and these things are valued, only important people are allowed to capture Sharpedo. Even when captured, Sharpedos are treated with care, brought back to land, their fins cut and sold at a high price, and every part of the fish is eaten. Even the bones are treated carefully, respectfully, and with love. In such places, the lives of many Sharpedo are not lost unnecessarily, and valuable things are treated as valuable. In the current capitalist world, which lacks rules and order, people on massive ships capture more Sharpedo than needed, cutting off their fins and throwing them back into the sea while still alive. This way, they procure them in large quantities and sell them cheaply. This is meritocracy. What's wrong with the strong killing the weak? The former represents many places and values in the Pokemon world. This time, however, Team Galactic holds the latter worldview. In other words, they represent the excessive and extreme aspects of the real world. Sharpedo are captured, have their fins cut off, and then are eaten. This is an obvious reference to shark fin soup, a controversial meal prepared and eaten in China, Taiwan, and parts of Southeast Asia. This meal is controversial because of the way the ingredients are gathered. Sharks are caught on large boats, then they have their fins cut off before they are thrown back into the ocean. They are unable to swim or hunt and will surely die. This practice goes back to the Ming Dynasty in China. It was considered a delicacy and a favorable food among the elites and the emperor, of course. Since then, the practice has been considered a high-end food in China. That was until recently, when the popularity started to wane due to the backlash of many animal and marine humane societies around the world. Shark fin soup is banned in most of the US, but is still practiced in some parts of Asia. This story focuses on the inhumane treatment of sharks, specifically a shark Pokemon, which makes it worse. Pokemon is a family-friendly franchise, so to include a reference to shark fin soup and the inhumane treatment of a Pokemon is an interesting take. There are probably multiple reasons this didn't make it into the games, but likely it was how close it was to a real-world issue, and also it just didn't fit with the themes of the games. Another story creates a pretty dark scenario, but also one that Pokemon has been kind of pushing for a while. There are several ideas shared in this story that we can discuss later. During the time when the boundaries between people, nature, and Pokemon were unclear, there were two groups of people in the world. The people living in the east of the world toured nature and lived with Pokemon as their family and sustenance. To the people of the east, there was no difference between people and Pokemon, and people could be a Pokemon's husband or wife. The moon and stars, which indicated the abundance of nature, were protected by Ea, the god of time. It was a giant dragon Pokemon that flew through the starry skies as the moon shone behind it. Its skin was as clear as ice and it had two supple legs. Pearl-like spheres covered its shoulders and back. When Ea flew, the moon changed shape and the stars twinkled, allowing people to tell the time and direction. The people and Pokemon of the east were grateful to Ea, gathering round, beautiful stones from the sea and offering them up. The people living in the west of the world lived by cultivating the earth by refining stones, growing crops, and building villages. The sun, which brought abundant harvests, was protected by Aya, the god of light. It was a giant dragon Pokemon that emerged from the earth at sunrise. It had thick, strong limbs and shiny skin like steel. Its upper arms shone like diamonds. When Aya walked, the sun grew stronger and brighter, shining warmly everywhere. People of the west were grateful to Aya, digging hard, shiny stones from the earth and offering them up. Over the long, peaceful days, the people of the west continued to multiply. Eventually, in order to obtain more crops, they cut down the forests and carved away the mountains to expand their villages. Then one day, a female Ursaring wandered into the village of the Westerners. Having lost her home, the Ursaring stole crops from the fields for her starving family and attacked one of the villagers. When the people found this out, they were so angry they killed the Ursaring and dumped her body in the forest on the outskirts of the village. The Ursaring's husband, a human man living in the eastern forest, went out to look for his wife, who had gone out to look for food and never returned. Eventually he reached the edge of the forest and found his wife's body. There were many tools that he had never seen before stuck in her body. The husband pulled them out with tears in his eyes and cried so loudly that the whole area shook. Then from beyond the edge, many people wearing clothes different from his own appeared. In their hands they carried the tools he had never seen before that had pierced his wife's body. Their eyes were clouded with anger. The husband took his wife's corpse and fled back into the forest. Returning to his friends, the husband held a round, beautiful stone in his arms and grieved over his wife's corpse. He grew increasingly resentful of the people who had killed his wife from the other side of the forest. His friends shared his grief and grew increasingly resentful. Except for one person, the child whose mother was murdered. The round and beautiful stone became ugly and distorted, and from beyond the full moon, Iya appeared. Iya's eyes, consumed by deep sadness, were pale and cloudy. Iya howled in a sad voice and flew off into the western sky. The moon was stained with blood, and all the stars fell. The area was consumed by darkness, and it became as cold as midwinter. The sea and the land froze. People could not move, as if time had stopped. The crops stopped growing and rotted in the blink of an eye. Seeing this, the people of the east and their Pokémon forgot to mourn for the slain Ursaring and headed to the other side of the forest. Only the child who had lost its mother made its way to the highest mountain where God resided to mourn her corpse. On the other side of the forest, there were fields and many people. The people were motionless, due to the cold and hunger. The people and Pokémon of the east ravaged the fields and killed the weak. The person who killed the most was the Ursaring's husband. The people of the west, whose friends had been killed and who had lost the fields they had raised, were furious and clutched their hard, shining stone, and they grew to resent the people who had come from the forest. The glow of the shiny stone disappeared as if absorbed, and with the sun, Iya appeared, shattering the ground. Aya's eyes, consumed by deep anger, were dark red and cloudy. Iya howled in a frightening voice and disappeared into the eastern forest. The sun was engulfed by a huge shadow. The area was enveloped in a searing light and heat. The sea dried up, and the vegetation withered away. Fire spread across the mountain, turning nature, people, and Pokémon to ash. The area was covered in black smoke. The Ursaring's husband was the first to be reduced to ash. The two dragon Pokémon continued to scream. One by one, the people of the west, the people of the east, the Pokémon, the mountains, and the rivers died. The child carrying the corpse of its mother reached the top of the highest mountain. The body had already almost completely decayed, but her clear eyes, beautiful heart, and gentle voice felt like they were alive. As the child looked up to the sky, he heard a sound from somewhere. "Don't you feel sadness over your mother's murder?" The child shook his head. "Don't you feel anger over your mother's murder?" The child shook his head. "Do you want to see your mother once more?" The child nodded deeply. Then the corpse of the mother began to change. The eyes were reborn into a ghost Pokémon never seen before. Its whole body glowed white, and its eyes shone like a rainbow. This being called itself Ray. Ray lovingly circled the child before flying away into the northern sky. The heart was reborn into a ghost Pokémon never seen before. Its whole body was a golden mist, and an orb in its center shone like a rainbow. This being called itself I. I lovingly circled the child before, flying away into the southwestern sky. The voice was reborn into a ghost Pokémon never seen before. Its whole body was blurry and smoky, and in its huge mouth, the teeth shone like a rainbow. This being called itself Hi. Hi lovingly circled the child before flying away into the southwestern sky. As the three flew away, a sound came from the sky. It was a very peaceful sound. From the direction of the crystal lake, the child felt its beloved mother's gaze. From the direction of the beautiful lake, the child felt its mother's beloved warmth. From the direction of the calm lake, the child heard its beloved mother's voice. The child prayed along with the sound. The area trembled, and the sound spread quickly. The sounds of prayer engulfed the forest, the village, the people, Pokemon, trees, and minerals as they all began to pray together. The world was filled with the sounds of prayer. The cries of anger and sadness slowly melted away in the vortex. Aya's dark red and cloudy eyes calmed, and the light and heat subsided. Ia's pale and cloudy eyes calmed, and everything began to move. The two dragon Pokemon left towards the highest mountain. The trees revived and the air became clear. The wind blew and the rivers returned. The world regained its fertile form. The people of the east and the people of the west were grateful to the child, Ray, I, and Hai, and decided to carefully protect the three lakes. And to avoid repeating the same mistake, they divided their habitats by the highest mountain. The sound of the prayer that appeased the two gods has been passed down as a song. Don't be sad, don't be angry. Be friends to everyone. Don't be sad, don't be angry. Ia will be sad. Aya will be angry. Don't be sad, don't be angry. The moon turns to blood, the sun is gone. Don't be sad, don't be angry. Ray is watching. Don't be sad, don't be angry. I is there. Don't be sad, don't be angry. Hai is listening. Don't be sad, don't be angry. Calm your heart and pray to God. This story presents several interesting and dark ideas to the world of Pokemon. One that I'm sure caught your attention right away was the idea of Pokemon and human marriage. There's been a strange hidden agenda of Pokemon that seems to make it so humans and Pokemon could be in relationships. Like in this story where a human man is married to an Ursaring. They even have a child together. There are a lot of fetish artists who probably read this story and had their views justified. There have been a few mentions of humans and Pokemon intermingling in the official lore, but most of those mention a time when humans and Pokemon were one. Like they shared a similar ancestor. Putting that aside, this story also has the murder of a Pokemon, whose corpse is then carried up a mountain. Before that, there's a slaughter of a village by the people of the East. 3 parts of the mother's corpse are then turned into different ghost Pokemon, those being the Lake Trio Pokemon. These Pokemon were mentioned to be ghost types in the story, but are actually psychic in canon. However, they also serve a similar purpose of calming the 2 dragons in the story, as well as doing so with the legendary Pokemon Dialga and Palkia. This story is very similar to the origins of these 3 in canon, but without the human-Pokemon marriage and the murder and turning people to ash parts. Pokemon created from the corpse of another is a pretty dark concept for children. It's very metal, but not something a 10-year-old would likely understand or not be scared by. It's just another disturbing piece of the cut content this game series would have liked very much to stay hidden. Of all the stories that leaked onto the internet, there's one that has caused the biggest stir. This is the Typhlosion Story. Long ago, when the boundary between Pokemon and humans was unclear, there was a village somewhere. One day, a girl from that village went into the mountains to gather firewood. She found well-dried, dead wood deep in the forest, so she kept going further in. Before she realized it, the sun was setting, and she had lost her way. Around her, there were droppings from a Typhlosion, which made the girl anxious. Just then, a man appeared from the other side of the forest. His face didn't resemble any from the village, but he was very handsome. The man said, "You must be lost, right? I know the way down the mountain, but with your pace, it would be midnight before we got there. I'll take you back tomorrow morning, so why don't you rest at my place tonight?" The girl had no choice but to agree to the man's suggestion. The man took her hand and began to walk. As evening fell, they arrived at a large cave. "This is my home. You must be hungry, right? Wait here." After saying that, the man went outside the cave. After he left, a red light shone from far away in the mountains, and there was the sound of trees swaying. Before long, the man returned carrying many red berries. He said, "Eat this, then let's sleep for the night. Even if you wake up before I do, don't look at my face." The next morning, when the girl woke up, the man was still asleep. She honored their promise and stayed lying down, waiting. Before long, she fell back asleep. She was awakened by the man's voice. When she looked outside, the sun was already setting. "Today, we'll eat green berries. Wait here." With that, he went out of the cave. After he left, the same red light shone from far away, and the sound of trees swaying echoed once more. By the time the sun had set completely, the man returned, carrying many green berries. He said, "Eat this, then let's sleep for the night. Even if you wake up before I do, don't look at my face." The girl expressed her concern that her family would be worried and that she wanted to go home soon. The man yawned widely and tapped her on the head. At that moment, she completely forgot about her family and home. The two of them ate the green berries together, then fell asleep. The same routine continued, with them waking up when the sun had set, the man going out to gather berries, and the two of them eating and sleeping together. Eventually, the girl realized that the man was a Typhlosion. As winter approached, the Typhlosion dug deeper into the cave and said to the girl, "Go and gather wood for firewood. Break off the branches from the highest part of tall trees." The girl tried to do as the Typhlosion instructed, but the tall trees scared her, so she could only climb the shorter ones. When she brought back some branches, the Typhlosion said, "That won't do. If it's not from the highest branches, humans will find us." When the snow began to fall, the two of them lived in the depths of the cave, mostly sleeping. There was plenty of food. Occasionally they would wake up, eat, and then go back to sleep. One day when she awoke, the girl was holding a child. After several days and nights passed, the Typhlosion said, "Your father is looking for you, but you are my wife, so I can't return you. I will have to fight him." The girl pleaded, "Please don't do that. Don't kill my father. How can I live with you if you kill my family? You are a good person, so please stay here with me and sleep." The man nodded. "All right, let's stay here and sleep." The next night, the Typhlosion woke the girl and said, "Your father is close by. Go and see." When the girl went outside, a snowstorm was raging. She climbed a low tree and broke off a branch. When she returned to the cave, the Typhlosion was singing a song she had never heard before. "You broke off a branch, didn't you? Soon your father will come here. I'm going to do something bad to your father. If I am killed, take my eyes, my voice, and my heart. Build a fire at the spot where I was killed and burn them. And while they burn, sing this song until the fire goes out." The girl said, "Please don't do it. Don't kill my father. If anyone is to be killed, let it be you. Goodbye. We will never meet again." With those words, the Typhlosion went outside. After a while, there was a loud noise, and when the girl looked outside, she saw her father had killed the Typhlosion. She rushed out and said to her father, "Father, you have killed my husband. I have been living with him all this time. He was my husband. Please give me my husband, the Typhlosion's eyes, voice, and heart." The girl built a fire at the place where the Typhlosion had been killed and put his eyes, voice, and heart into the flames. She sang the song the Typhlosion had taught her until the fire burned out. The girl's father built a small hut on the edge of the village for the girl and her child to live in. Eventually, spring arrived. The young men of the village often teased and tormented the girl and her child. It became worse over time, and one day they tried to drape a Typhlosion's pelt over them. The girl returned home and pleaded with her parents, "Please tell the villagers to stop teasing us. If they put the pelt on us, we will surely become Typhlosion. We are already half Typhlosion as it is." Despite the parents' pleas, the villagers did not listen. In fact, they found it even more amusing and eventually draped the Typhlosion's pelt over the girl and her child. At that moment, they howled loudly and vanished into the depths of the forest. The two were never seen again. And so, people came to understand, Typhlosion are half human beings. This story captured the internet's attention the most. Typhlosion is a very popular Pokemon, and this makes that image murky for several reasons. The Typhlosion Stockholm syndromed a girl into becoming his wife. Not only that, but she had a child with him while being unaware of it happening. She was under some kind of hypnosis as the Typhlosion would yawn and touch her forehead, making her forget things, which is just such a weird choice to make. The whole thing being non-consensual and her not even knowing about it is very weird, and I understand why the internet had such a harsh reaction to this story. It all comes to a head with her and her child turning into Typhlosions themselves. The final line confirms that all Typhlosions are half human, which is an interesting lore choice. I'm not sure why they both became Pokemon after wearing the pelt, but that's what happens. The story has become the main talk of the entire Pokemon leak so far. There's so much more in here, but this one has offended more people than it was ever supposed to. Considering it was all cut content, this one felt like it should have been permanently deleted from all the drives. Well, according to a user on Twitter, there's actually more to this story than what was presented. That original story was mistranslated in a few ways. A lot of what happens is correct, but not all of it. The woman was supposedly saved by the Pokemon who was disguised as a hermit and ended up marrying him of her own volition. She had his child, still weird since it was a Pokemon, but it was consensual. The ending is kind of right, but the other translation says that she and her child left the world of humans and wore the hides as their own choice. They chose to become Pokemon as they no longer fit in with the human world. The story was heavily based on similar yokai legends, and as the game is Japanese, that makes a lot of sense. This other translation hasn't been fully released yet, so we'll have to wait a little longer to get the truth about what Typhlosion was doing. One particularly upsetting part is how the girl was described. She's described as a small woman, but that can translate to a girl between the ages of 7 and 17, so the story is still creepy. The translation is heavily in debate, as no one has outright come out as a native Japanese speaker and translated it. There are several holes in the translation that the Twitter user presented. The mentions of Typhlosion being a hermit is nowhere in the text. Also, no section of the text confirms that it was consensual in any way. She was kidnapped by Typhlosion and essentially hypnotized into staying with him and bearing his child. The jury is still mostly out on how the story is supposed to be properly interpreted though, but since it was never supposed to exist, I highly doubt we'll ever get a clear answer. This next story is violent and has a similar theme to it that a lot of the stories we've covered so far have, so let's just get into it. Back when the boundary between man and Pokemon was blurred, there was a man who lived in a seaside village. One day, as the man was walking along the shore, a female Octillery had washed up on the beach. The man copulated with the Octillery and cast her back into the ocean. When he returned to the same location the next day, the Octillery had returned. The man copulated with the Octillery again, just as before, cast her back into the ocean. One evening after a few days had passed, the man had a dream. In that dream, the Octillery told the man, "I cannot come to see you, my love, but I shall bring you your child, our child." The next day the man returned to where he had met her. There was a boy. The man took the child and returned home and raised him. As the years passed, the boy came of age, and the man passed away. The young man was always lonely. One day, as the young man was walking along the shore, he spotted a crowd of people having fun in the distance. All the people danced, grasping huge swords in their hands. The young man headed towards them. Upon doing so, he realized they were Sharpedo. When the young man approached them, the Sharpedo plunged into the ocean simultaneously, except for a Soul Sharpedo that hesitated, glanced to and fro thrice, and left. He approached where they had been playing, and there lay a large sword. It was his first time seeing a sword of its shape. Its blade was incredibly thin and sharp. The young man took the sword home. The next day, the young man took the sword into the forest. While he was strolling through the forest, he encountered an Ursaring. To test his sword, the young man swung his blade towards the Ursaring's mouth. With ease, their mouth was cleaved off. The next slash pierced their eyeball. With ease, their eye was crushed. The young man thrust his sword into the Ursaring's chest. Their death was swift. On that day, the young man murdered 30 Ursaring. From then on, the young man would carry his blade with him, wherever he walked, maiming, cleaving, and such the Pokemon he encountered for fun. One autumn, the young man lost his way while searching for firewood. After walking for a while, he stumbled upon the Ursaring's den. When he looked inside, he saw an elderly Ursaring lying on their side. The old Ursaring saw the young man and spoke. "Come inside." The young man was lost, but it was already dark outside, so he entered the cave. In an instant, people began to enter the den one after another. It was not long before the room was crowded. On inspection, everyone's faces were covered in scars, and some people were missing eyes. The people conversed with one another, but the young man ignored them and slept. At one point when he woke up, the elderly Ursaring was sleeping beside him. The young man went back to sleep. When he woke up again, the crowd had returned and were discussing something. The young man ignored them again and slept. Soon it had become spring, and the elder asked the young man a question. "Do you wish to return home? Then I shall take you. Near the village, when you return home, you will find a whale lord. Go there. We will send one of our men. Leave your blade behind and bring the witnesses. Why have you done such a thing? Slicing up faces, mutilating noses." The elderly Ursaring guided the young man up to the village. Upon his return to the village, he told the people everything that had happened to him. On the next morning, with the villagers in tow, the young man headed towards the coast. He walked along the shore. Eventually, there the large whale lord was. And not far on the sands, a Teddiursa. The Teddiursa hid in the forest once it was spotted. In their place, out came an Ursaring. As the Ursaring advanced upon him, the young man drew his concealed sword. However, the blade was lodged. He couldn't fully unsheath it. So the young man grappled with the Ursaring instead. Hand to hand, the young man and the Ursaring struck each other's faces. With all their might, they strangled one another. Finally, their breaths lapsed and their bodies formed a pile. The villagers returned home and told the people what they had seen. There are so many stories of Pokemon and human relations in these leaks that it's no wonder none of these made it in. Someone seemed to have really wanted that concept to happen, though. Here we also have a kid who just wanted to kill and maim Pokemon. He does so, but ends up dying to one in the end. This is a weird story because I'm not sure what the moral is. A lot of these are supposed to have morals, like fables, but this one doesn't have an easy to recognize one. It's probably a lack of proper translation or localization. It ends up just being another story that didn't make it into the games, and for good reason. The scene where he is taken into a cave and sees all the Pokemon that he disfigured is a dark image. It sets the tone of the possible grief he could have felt towards his actions. Of course, he ignored those feelings and ends up dying in a way that makes sense given his actions. This next story is another one about Pokemon being treated harshly by humans and the revenge that comes of it. Long ago, when the boundaries between humans and Pokemon were still blurred, there was a woman and her friends. Every day was boring for them, so they would often go into the forest to catch the Slakoth that lived there. They would amuse themselves by killing the Slakoth, crushing their eyeballs and cutting off their ears. One day the woman was walking alone in the forest and saw a Slakoth hanging from the trees. She tried to climb the tree to catch it, but lost her footing and injured herself. Then a Vigoroth appeared. This Vigoroth had a chipped ear. The woman tried to run, but the pain in her leg kept her from doing so. The Vigoroth with the chipped ear suddenly attacked the woman. She lost consciousness. She awoke in a place she had never seen before. There she saw a large, clear lake surrounded by trees. Many Slakoth and Vigoroth hung from the trees. All the Pokemon had injuries on their bodies. It was done to them by the woman and her friends. Looking closer, the corpses of Slakoth also hung from those trees. They were the corpses of Slakoth killed and discarded by the woman and her friends. Their bodies were tossed into the lake. The woman was afraid and tried to escape, but just then a Slaking appeared. It too had a chipped ear. She realized that the Slaking that stood before her was a Vigoroth from before. Panicked, she lost consciousness again. She woke once more. She was near the entrance to the forest by her house, surrounded by her friends. They took her on their back and carried her home. Sometime later, the woman gave birth to a child. The child was a Slakoth. She tried to dispose of the child, but could not. She stopped seeing her friends and raised a Slakoth. Concerned about the woman, her friends went near her house and found a Slakoth sleeping. It was the woman's child. As usual, they caught the Slakoth, stabbed it in the chest, and killed it. They took the body and brought it with them to the woman's house. She was greatly saddened at the sight of the slain Slakoth. She took the body from them and ran deep into the forest. Her friends were shocked and chased after her. As they went deeper into the forest, a great clear lake came into view. Around the lake, there were many Slakoth and Vigoroth. The woman stood before the lake and threw herself into it with the Slakoth's body. From then on, her friends began to see the Slakoth as friends, just as she had. A group of humans are injuring and in some cases killing Slakoth for the fun of it. In the end, the woman is essayed by one of them and ends up with the Slakoth child, then killed by her friends because they don't know that it's her child. She then jumps into a lake where a bunch of other Slakoth bodies are already discarded. This is the perfect story to put in a game for children. There's not even a good moral here. They just become friends after. The humans and the Pokemon. I'm not sure why this would ever be considered for a storyline or a piece of lore in a game considering it's appropriate for children. The scene with the injured Slakoth hanging from the trees with the corpses of their brethren was like something out of a horror movie. The woman is then forced to watch them be thrown into the lake like some kind of burial ritual. It's a somber scene that paints the cruelty of humanity. They are killing for fun, senseless violence that is hurting a whole other community. The corpses hanging from trees was a striking narrative visual that I think stands out more than anything I've read in the other stories so far. For now, these are all the stories that came out of the leaks, though. There is a story about the creation of Pokemon and the Pokemon Bible, some are calling it, and more stories appear to be on the way. The translations are being worked on, so I don't doubt that we'll have even weirder, darker, and more messed up stories as this leak progresses. These stories feel like folk legends, and I can get the idea behind why they would be created. Folklore is often weird, dark, and strange to a modern audience. It was meant to encapsulate a moment in time, one that has long passed. Yet the stories continue. My main issue is that these stories are written for or about the world of Pokemon, a world that many of us grew up with, and a world that is oftentimes an escape from the dark side of reality. As I have said many times before, there's just something so disturbing about corrupting childhood innocence.